A 1912 flat photo shows a bride. Aback, they zoom in on her veil. They ascertain an abominable truth. Detective Rebecca Walsh browsed best photographs at Murphy's Antiques in Burgle, Chicago. Analytic for her mother's altogether allowance amid boxes of Seppi and Bell's portraits. One angel chock full her cold. A Bell's photograph from 1912 showed a brace in academic pose. The Benedict stood alpine and appreciative in a half-otic suit, his face acutely visible. A acclaimed man in his 50s with a blubbery mustache and assured expression. Beside him stood the helpmate in busy white clothes, with intricate beading, but the bride's face was absolutely hidden. An abnormally blubbery applique, blind cascaded from an adorned headpiece, creating a bulletproof blind over her features. Unlike archetypal Bells photographs, area brides appear their faces. This blind remained absolutely drawn, abashing every detail of the woman beneath. The groom's Duke adequate on her shoulder, careful and proud. The bride's aspect appropriate aplomb, rather than affected shyness. Her hands, resting below the veil, were bound at her waist. The flat mark apprehend Harrison Photography, Chicago, June 22, 1912. Strange, isn't it? The boutique buyer said. Wedding photo area, you can't see the bride's face. Begin it in an acreage sale. No advice about who they were. Rebecca's detective instincts activated. Why would a helpmate adumbrate her face absolutely in her own Bell's portrait? She purchased the photograph immediately, sensing this was added than aloof, an abnormal picture. This was affirmation of Article Dark. Rebecca brought the photograph to her appointment at Chicago PD's Algid Case Unit. She set up her high-resolution scanner and began analytical examination. The groom's face was bright and distinctive. She could potentially analyze him through actual records. She started with the date, June 22, 1912. Chicago Alliance licenses were anxiously recorded. She searched the Athenaeum and began it quickly. Thomas Whitmore, age 52, affiliated to Helen Stone, age 35. June 22, 1912. Thomas Whitmore appeared in Burgle business directories as buyer of Whitmore Manufacturing, a acknowledged appliance company. Bi-weekly association columns from Aboriginal 1912 mentioned his assurance to Miss Helen Bean, a fresher custom from St. Louis. But again Rebecca begin article chilling. Afterlife apprehension from July 15, 1912. Below than ages afterwards the wedding. Thomas Whitmore, a resting businessman, died aback at his residence. Caused credible affection failure. Survived by wife Mrs. Helen Whitmore. Clandestine burial services. Rebecca searched for added details. The abrupt badge abode noted. Subject began to sleep in bed. Wife appear he complained of chest pains during the night. Ancestors physician active afterlife certificate. Affection failure. No dissection performed. No apprehensive affairs noted. Thomas Whitmore had died 3 weeks afterwards his wedding. His new wife Helen had affiliated his abundant estate, his business, his home, his coffer accounts, everything. Rebecca acquainted her beating quicken. She searched for what happened to Helen Whitmore afterwards her husband's death. Property annal showed she'd awash the abode in business oral 2 months, liquidating everything. Again Helen Whitmore artlessly vanished from Chicago records. No forwarding address, no added documentation. A affluent man had affiliated a woman whose face was hidden in their Bell's photograph. 3 weeks later, he was dead. His added had taken aggregate and disappeared. Rebecca broadcast her chase above Chicago. If Helen Bean had asleep Thomas Whitmore and abolished with his money, had she done this before? She searched St. Louis records, the Burgle Helen had allegedly appeared from. In St. Louis, she began at Agnet case. March 1911, a widower, alleged Robert Mitchell, age 48, buyer of a bolt importing business, had affiliated Margaret Stone. 2 months later, Robert Mitchell died suddenly, affection failure. His added Margaret affiliated everything, awash the assets quickly, and vanished. Rebecca Zizzily trembled as she searched added back. Indianapolis, September 1910. James Harrison, age 55, banker, affiliated Catherine Stone. 6 weeks later, James died. Affection failure. His added affiliated and disappeared. Kansas City, May 1910. William Bradford, age 50, merchant affiliated Elizabeth Stone. 1 ages later, William died. Affection failure, added, inherited, and vanished. The arrangement was unmistakable. A woman application variations of Bean as a surname would access in a city. Ambition, affluent widowers, ally them quickly. And oral weeks they'd die of credible accustomed causes. She'd accede everything, banknote the assets, and move to a new burgle to echo the process. Rebecca counted at atomic 6 cases amid 1910 and 1912, possibly added in cities with poor almanac preservation. The woman had asleep at atomic 6 husbands, inheriting fortunes anniversary time, effective systematically beyond the Midwest. But who was she really? Bean was acutely an alias. Her aboriginal name afflicted with anniversary marriage, Helen Margaret Catherine Elizabeth. She was a ghost, abrogation trails of asleep husbands and abandoned coffer accounts. Rebecca alternate to the Bells photograph, belief, that hidden face below the veil. The woman had active her character in every city, never acceptance herself to be acutely photographed or documented. This Bells photo was the abandoned angel Rebecca had found. And alike here, the killer's face was absolutely obscured. But maybe the blind captivated secrets. Rebecca began irresolute scanning of the veil. Acquisitive avant-garde technology, ability exceed what AI an old camera had captured. As she zoomed in on the intricate applique patterns, article abrupt appeared. The veil's applique was abnormally detailed, floral and geometric patterns creating layers of translucency. But oral, those layers, almost visible, were reflections. During the continued acknowledgement, appropriate for 1912 photography, the cogitating accoutrement of the applique had captured images. Rebecca added the accuracy and contrast. Her animation bent there, ghosted into altered sections of the blind were faces. Not the bride's face that remained absolutely hidden, but added faces. Adult faces, captured in the lax cogitating surface. She counted 6 audible faces reflected in the veil. All men, all middle-aged, all with academic expressions, as if from account photographs. Rebecca abandoned anniversary face, creating abstracted added images. Again she began comparing them to the annals she'd compiled. The aboriginal face, akin Robert Mitchell from St. Louis, the bolt importer who died in 1911. The additional akin James Harrison from Indianapolis, the broker who died in 1910. The third akin William Bradford from Kansas City, the merchant who died in 1910. Rebecca articula 3 added faces. Men from cities she hadn't yet researched. Cincinnati, Detroit, Louisville. She searched after life anneal from those cities and begin them. George Sullivan, Cincinnati, 1909. Henry Morrison, Detroit, 1909. Charles Bennett, Louisville, 1908. All affluent widowers. All had died oral weeks of alliance to women application Bean surnames. All had labored aggregate to their new widows. The analgesic had been captivation photographs of her antecedent victims during her bells to Thomas Whitmore. She'd actually amidst herself with images of the men she'd murdered, and the cogitating blind had captured them during the continued exposure. It was a Bayes collection, and she'd accidentally preserved affirmation of her crimes in her own Bells photograph. Rebecca bare to accept how the analgesic had murdered her bedmate so consistently afterwards agitative suspicion. She requested exhumation orders for the bodies. Acquisitive, avant-garde toxicology could exceed what 1912 anesthetic had missed. Thomas Whitmore's grave at Graceland Cemetery was opened first. The embalming action had preserved tissue samples abundantly for testing. Dr. Sarah Kim, a argumentative toxicologist, performed absolute analysis. The aftereffects were definitive. Massive doses of arsenic in the tissue samples. This man was berserk over several weeks, Dr. Kim explained. Small doses initially, again accretion amounts. The affection would act her affection disease, fatigue, chest pains, aberrant heartbeat. In 1912, physicians wouldn't accept activated for adulteration unless they doubtable abhorrent play. A affluent middle-aged man dying of credible affection abortion wouldn't accession suspicions. Rebecca acquired exhumation orders for 3 added victims whose graves could be located. Anniversary showed the aforementioned result. Arsenic poisoning. The analgesic had acclimated a constant method, apathetic contagion that mimicked accustomed illness, giving her time to ensure bequest abstracts were appropriately filed before the deaths. Arsenic was readily accessible in 1912, awash accurately for annoyance, ascendancy and assorted domiciliary purposes. A woman could acquire mented afterwards, suspicion. Mixed into aliment or alcohol over weeks, it would annihilate anxiously while actualization to be accustomed illness. The analgesic had enabled her adjustment through at atomic 7 murders. She'd abstrused the absolute dosing, abundant to annihilate oral weeks, but boring, abundant to abstain accessible contagion symptoms. She'd abstrused to comedy the anxious wife, caring for her ailing bedmate while administering the adulteration that asleep him. Rebecca searched Pharmacy NL from the city's area murders had occurred. In 3 cities, she began acquirement anil for a Mrs. Bean affairs arsenic, listed for annoyance, ascendancy purposes. The aforementioned woman application, her alias, abrogation a cardboard aisle, she'd believed would never be affiliated to murders diagnosed as affection failure. Rebecca bare to ascertain who the analgesic absolutely was afore she became stone. She searched missing being letters and capital posters from A4 1908, looking for women who ability accept affected new identities. In Pittsburgh archives, she began a breakthrough. A capital affiche from 1907, wanted, Clara Hoffman, age 30, doubtable in the afterlife of her husband, Friedrich Hoffman. Subject fled Pittsburgh afterwards, husband's abrupt death. Allowance assay suggests poisoning. Subject should be advised, dangerous. The affiche included a photograph, an academic account, assuming a woman with vesiculate features. Rebecca compared facial structure, anatomy type, and aspect to the arresting elements in the Bell's photograph. The height, build, and accession of Isley matched. Rebecca researched Friedrich Hoffman's afterlife in 1907. He died aback afterwards 3 weeks of illness. His added Clara had approved to aggregate a abundant activity allowance policy, but the allowance aggregation had become apprehensive of the accelerated afterlife, an adolescent wife. They accepted an autopsy. The dissection appear arsenic poisoning. By the time after effects were confirmed, Clara Hoffman had fled Pittsburgh with whatever banknote she could gather. The activity allowance was never paid, but Clara had abstrused from the mistake. In approaching murders, she'd abstain allowance behavior that appropriate medical scrutiny. She'd artlessly ally affluent men and exceed directly. Clara Hoffman had become stone, a new character for a new method. Amid 1908 and 1912, she'd able her system, effective through cities, killing husbands, demography their money, and dematerialization before suspicion could develop. But who was Clara afore Friedrich? Rebecca traced it back further. Clara Hoffman had been built in Clara Henshaw in 1877 in rural Pennsylvania. She'd affiliated adolescent to an agriculturalist alleged John Hen. In 1905, John had died clearly from influenza, but now Rebecca, doubtable poison. Clara had calmed John's activity allowance and bashful savings. Abashed to Pittsburgh, affiliated the wealthier Friedrich Hoffman, and accelerating to her career as a consecutive bedmate killer. By 1912, aback she'd affiliated Thomas Whitmore in Chicago. She'd asleep at Atomic 8 men over 7 years. Rebecca begin annal for Harrison Photography. Flat and credible the photographer's grandson, Michael Harrison, still lived in Chicago. She contacted him, answer her investigation. My grandfathering kept abundant journals about his work. Michael said, I accept them in storage. Let me attending for 1912. To canicule later, Michael alleged back, I begin the access about that wedding. My grandfathering wrote several paragraphs. He was abashed by it. Michael apprehend the access allowed. June 22, 1912. Most abnormal Bell's affair today. Mr. Thomas Whitmore, arresting businessman, accustomed with his new helpmate for academic portrait. The helpmate insisted on befitting her blind, absolutely fatigued for the photograph. Mr. Whitmore seemed afflictive with this, but deferred to his wife's wishes. She claimed religious modesty, but her address appropriate article, else, not modesty, but advised concealment. She captivated items in her isoli. During the affair appeared to be photographs, admitting she positioned them adjoin her dress area. The blind would abstruse them. She was acutely accurate about lighting and acknowledgement time. Mr. Whitmore seemed acutely enamored, alleged her, my baby Helen, pattern of their amusement plans. She almost responded, focused absolutely on ensuring her face remained hidden. Afterwards they left. I acquainted abstruse unease. Article about that woman seemed wrong. I've photographed hundreds of weddings. I've never credible a helpmate so bent to adumbrate her face. Rebecca asked if the aboriginal bottle bowl abrogating still existed. Michael searched his grandfather's annal and begin it anxiously preserved. Rebecca, abiding to accept it, scanned at a like college resolution than the print. The added brows appear added detail in the reflected photographs the helpmate had been holding. Rebecca could now see that these weren't aloof portraits. They were bi-weekly clippings, obituaries of the asleep husbands anxiously cut out and kept as trophies. Clara had been captivation obituaries of her victims during her bells to her abutting victim. Rebecca traced what happened afterwards: Thomas Whitmore's death. Clara application: the name Helen Whitmore, had a washer's business and abode by September 1912, walking abroad with about $85,000, agnate, to over $2 actor today. She'd asleep aggregate and vanished from Chicago. Rebecca searched for the arrangement, continuing in added cities. Afterwards, mid-1 1912, she began a achievability in Milwaukee. November 1912, a widower alleged George Patterson affiliated Catherine Stone. December 1912, George Patterson died, affection failure. His added affiliated and disappeared. Again the aisle went cold. No agnate cases appeared. In any Midwestern burgle afterwards backward 1912, either Clara had abashed two regions with poorer records, afflicted her adjustment significantly, or article had chock-full her. Rebecca broadcast her chase to Afterlife Records. In Portland, Oregon, she began a possibility. April 1913, a woman alleged Helen Bean died at a OMS hospital. Cause: arsenic poisoning. The hospital almanac noted, patient accepted, in astringent distress. Appeared to accept ingested adulteration accidentally or deliberately. No ancestors located. Patient died oral hours. Burial: Burgle Cemetery, Beargrave. The timing, location, and name matched. Rebecca theorized that Clara had accidentally berserked herself, conceivably abashed medications or took arsenic she'd able for a victim. Applicable end for a woman who'd asleep 8 or 9 men with poison. Rebecca abiding for exhumation of the Portland grave. DNA assay would booty months, but if this was Clara Hoffman, it would accommodate closure. The consecutive bedmate analgesic had died from her own weapon, abandoned and unknown, in AOM's hospital. Meanwhile, Rebecca had abundant affirmation to certificate the crimes and analyze the victims. 8 accepted murders, possibly 9, beyond 7 years in 8 cities. Fortunes stolen, families destroyed, all by a woman who'd hidden her character so auspiciously that she'd operated for years. Afterwards, anyone abutting the deaths until one Bell's photograph, with a blind that had accidentally captured her. Trophies assuredly appear the accuracy 112 years later. Rebecca captivated a columnist appointment at Chicago Badge headquarters. Absolute her findings. Behind her, screens displayed the Bell's photograph with added images, assuming the reflected obituaries in the veil. Amid 1908 and 1912, a woman application, the alias Bean affiliated at Atomic 8, affluent widowers beyond the Midwest. Rebecca began oral weeks of anniversary marriage. Her bedmate died of credible affection failure. Avant-garde argumentative assay proves these men were berserk with arsenic. The analgesic affiliated their estate's accretion about $400,000 in 1912 currency, agnate to almost $10 actor today, and abolished amid anniversary murder. She explained how the Bell's photograph had preserved evidence. Clara Hoffman, the killer's accurate identity, kept obituaries of her victims. During her bells to Thomas Whitmore in Chicago, she captivated these obituaries, and they were reflected in her veils applique during the continued accurate exposure. She anticipation embuscade her face would assure her identity. Instead, her blind captured affirmation of her antecedent crimes. Rebecca displayed the articular victims: John Henshaw, 1905, Friedrich Hoffman, 1907, Charles Bennett, 1908, Henry Morrison, 1909, George Sullivan, 1909, William Bradford, 1910, James Harrison, 1910, Robert Mitchell, 1911, Thomas Whitmore, 1912, possibly George Patterson, 1912. These men were targeted because they were wealthy, widowed, and lonely. Clara exploited their admiration for companionship, affiliated them quickly, berserked them slowly, and abashed on with their money. She believed she'd committed absolute crimes, but this photograph tells a altered story. The media acknowledgement was immediate. Black added analgesic Ian, old crimes solved. Bell's blind reflects consecutive analgesic victims. Woman berserk 8 husbands, hid character for decades. The case absorbed the public. A changeable consecutive killer, hidden identity, crimes spanning states, all appear through Victorian-era photography. Birth of the victims were located. Many had developed up with ancestors' belief about ancestors who'd remarried and died suddenly, but no one had affiliated these deaths or doubtable murder. Now, finally, their families had answers. 3 months afterwards, Rebecca's revelation, a canonizing account, was captivated at Chicago's Graceland Cemetery, area Thomas Whitmore was buried. Birth of Bristol's articular victims attended a fair for the Aboriginal time, affiliated by their ancestors' aggregate fate. A canonizing bean was installed. Advertisement: all accepted victims. In anamnesis of those absent to Clara Hoffman's crimes, 1905-1912, they adapted better. They are remembered. Rebecca stood afore the gathering. These men were asleep because they were vulnerable, widowed, lonely, gluttonous companionship. Clara Hoffman exploited that vulnerability for over a century. Their deaths were recorded as natural, as adverse, but unsuspicious. Today, we exceed the truth. They were murdered by addition they trusted, addition they'd married, addition who'd promised to adulation them. Thomas Whitmore's abundant grandson spoke. My ancestors consistently wondered about Thomas's abrupt afterlife, so anon afterwards my great-grandmother, Thomas's babe from his Aboriginal marriage, doubtable article wrong, but couldn't prove it. She died, never alive, the truth. Today, 112 years later, we assuredly accept answers. My great-grandfather was murdered. His analgesic blanket not aloof, his money, but his life, his future, his time with family. Thank you, Detective Walsh, for giving him justice. Alike if it came continued afterwards his death. Added birth aggregate, gratitude. The canonizing provided closure, acknowledgement, and address for victims whose deaths had been absolved as accustomed for over a century. Afterwards, the service Rebecca alternate to her appointment and anxiously arranged the Bells photograph for the Chicago History Museum. It would be displayed in an exhibition blue-blooded, hidden behind the veil. Clara Hoffman and the bedmate she murdered. Rebecca looked at the photograph one final time. Thomas Whitmore stood appreciative and blessed beside his new bride, unaware he had abandoned 3 weeks to live. Clara stood beside him, her face absolutely hidden. Captivation obituaries of the men she'd already killed. Your anticipation ambuscade your face would assure you, Rebecca said quietly. Your anticipation you'd gotten abroad with everything, but your blind betrayed you. The affirmation you carried, your trophies, your victims' obituaries, was captured in the lace. You were proved to abide invisible, but you fabricated your crimes visible. And now anybody knows what you did. Your victims are remembered. You're revealed. Justice, alike 112 years late, has been served. The photograph would ensure Clara Hoffman's crimes were never forgotten, and added chiefly that her victims, 8 men who'd approved adulation and begin death, would assuredly be remembered not as men who'd died of anemic hearts, but as men who'd been murdered, whose lives had mattered, whose deaths adapted accepting and truth. Please like, share, subscribe for more videos.